Hi, my name is Jonathan Pershing. I'm the Special Envoy for Climate Change at the U.S. Department of State, and I'm here in Johannesburg as part of a trip through a number of countries in Africa, largely in preparation for a meeting that will be held in mid-November called the Conference of Parties to the UN Convention on Climate Change. That session has had an enormous number of tasks. Most recently in Paris last December, it concluded a major agreement between all the countries in the world to try to really take on this climate change problem and act aggressively to minimize the damages. We agreed that countries would take their own actions, that those actions would be reviewed, reported on and reviewed at an international level, that there would be financial support to help developed and least developed countries succeed in their endeavors, and there would be a regular stock take, a process in which we'd evaluate over a period of time how effective the agreement had been and see what else we had to do. The first year of that has been one really of getting countries entrained to take the actions that they committed to. They're called nationally determined contributions, so a pretty fancy label for essentially what countries have agreed to undertake in the way of emissions reductions. And they range quite widely. The United States agreed to a 26 to 28% reduction from 2005 levels by the year 2025, so a really sharp decrease. India has agreed to reduce the intensity of its economy. In other words, how much carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases does it put out per unit of economic output? China also an intensity commitment. Countries like South Africa have agreed to address their problems and their greenhouse gas emissions through a management of their coal sector, through a consideration of some of the work that's happening in industry, and have also been very concerned about the impacts of climate in the context of their agricultural environment as well as their coasts. This has been matched by a concern by many others in the continent. We had the opportunity to have meetings in Senegal, meetings with, for example, the Minister of Fisheries. One of the things that will be happening off the Atlantic coast in Senegal is a warming of the oceans, leading to a change in the migratory patterns of fish, and they're very concerned about a sharp decline in fish populations. We had meetings in Nigeria. One of the things that Nigeria is very concerned about is what are the implications for the oil sector? How do you think about that, a major producer on the continent? What are the consequences of the world using less? But also, how does Nigeria manage its own internal demand, which is growing as its population and economic wealth grows, to manage the emissions associated with that sector? A lot's being done, though, and there's an enormous potential for change. I've been struck by all of the countries that I have talked to at how ripe and how significant the conversation is on renewable energy. People are looking at efficiency as a scenario. People are looking at how they can do more with less and do better with what they have, which means better jobs, and in some cases jobs at all. Certainly in the context of, say, a South Africa with an unemployment rate that's nearly 25% or more, you have an enormous interest in what you can do for the creation of new, well-paying, sustainable jobs. Jobs that actually support the environment as well as the economy. One of the things that we need to do is to find those solutions and those activities that do both. We need to manage, in addition, not just how we reduce emissions, but how we manage the impacts. And this is going to affect every sector. So for example, if we take a look at the agricultural sector, which is a major issue in the entire continent, much of which still lives in subsistence agriculture, and we think about a change in the patterns of rainfall or a change in the amount of temperature that we've got, how hot it gets at the hottest seasons, or in some cases, if you're near the coast, salt water comes in and washes away the fresh water and the crops no longer can grow because the soil is no longer capable of supporting that kind of life. How do you address these kinds of questions? And we're going to have to do this pretty quickly because the climate is changing relatively quickly. We've already seen about 1 degree of warming. We expect that that will go up. We're trying to stop it below 1.5, but certainly below 2. At 2 degrees of warming, we could have as much as 1 to 3 feet of sea level rise. We could have that temperature change. We are likely to have increased malaria, increased dengue fever, increased schistosomiasis. All the diseases that plague us look like they get worse with increases in temperature. We're likely to change the rainy patterns of our wet and dry seasons. We're likely to increase drought. Every one of these problems is manifest in the continent of Africa. This is a continent at risk, as is the rest of the world, and calls for a real engagement in a global response. And my discussions here have been very much tailored to trying to generate that interest and understanding. So when we go to the meeting in Morocco, that's going to be held in November, we have really strong ideas. We have agreed on what we can do. We've agreed on how we can be working both bilaterally where the United States engages with other countries, and multilaterally as we all work together to solve this global issue.